Infinetics does a lot of, I track shipments of firewalls and IPS products and all the security gear out there. We also do a lot of survey research where we talk to end customers about their plans for deploying security. So now what we're going to go through on the enterprise side is a bit of survey data that says, all right, here's what sort of the broad enterprise population is trying to do to protect themselves against the threats they see today. So the first question is security a priority? So this was actually not a survey about security. This was an enterprise networking survey, and we asked the top initiatives. It was an open-ended question. It's about 200 North American organizations. Said, what are your top IT initiatives right now? We categorized all the responses, but despite all of the talk about cloud and BYOD and mobility, and 19% of the open responses that we got were security initiatives, right? It's absolutely top of mind, probably not surprising to anyone here. In a survey of security professionals, what are you deploying? What are you making new investments in? What are you keeping your investments flat in? Part of the problem with security is that there are a billion technologies. If you go into a wiring closet in a data center or a typical enterprise location, you would probably find a firewall, some sort of mail security appliance, maybe a WebSense appliance or a piece of a server running WebSense, web filtering, and web protection. You might find an access control device, a NAC appliance, something managing what people have access to, whether their devices are clean and safe. You might find in the data center some DDoS mitigation infrastructure. You might find a whole overlay solution for data loss prevention, so preventing data from escaping the network once someone gets their hands on it. All of these things are stacked up on top of each other. Now, the industry is going through a period right now where we're trying to collapse this functionality into fewer devices, but that's hard to do. For a lot of people, they have political affiliations with their web filtering vendor. So even if I could run my web filter, I'm a long-standing WebSense customer, and I like what WebSense offers me, and that's not what I get when I turn the same thing on in my firewall, so I'm going to stick with WebSense or whatever. There are a lot of reasons why people don't go to consolidate functions, but that's a huge trend in the industry. The reason for that is because when you layer all these things on top of each other, it's really hard to get the most out of the ecosystem of products. So you may have protection against every type of attack if all of these things were communicating with each other. But the truth is that they're not. And so what's really missing is some glue, right? Some system or systems that sit in between all of the protection mechanisms that have been purchased, that people have invested in, that has a superset of knowledge about what's going on and can help all those devices make smarter decisions. And so what I thought was interesting, particularly about the Invotas solution, which you'll hear about after me, is that it's one of those glue pieces that's so important in helping all of these individual devices that every enterprise have work together in a much more coordinated way, again, aimed at that ultimate goal of breach to remediation going from months or weeks or days to hours or minutes, or seconds even in some cases, depending on exactly what's going on. But everyone's investing more money in lots of functions. Hopefully they're consolidating down to fewer platforms to make their life simpler, but even so, they're going to have a bunch of platforms. So what drives them to invest in security? The real story here is everything, right? In very few cases, in fact, the only thing that's sort of low on the list is enabling BYOD, and that's because that's not really a security technologist mandate. That's a, hey, we're rolling out a BYOD program, you need to secure it. So they don't see themselves as enabling it. They just have to deal with security when it happens. And that's it. We'll talk a little bit about mobility later. That's a tricky environment. But protecting against loss of data is always at the top of the list, whether it's stolen or whether it's accidentally leaked, like when you put your file up in the Dropbox. Not a problem if your Dropbox is never compromised, right? But Evernote was compromised. Anyone here use Evernote to take notes for events? I use it. Probably information on my Evernote account that I wouldn't want leaked out. But we use these tools because they're convenient. Performance upgrades. So we're going through this huge, I won't talk too much about this in other audiences. This is a big deal, but we've had a lot of infrastructure upgrades. And so there's a requirement now for security performance to greatly increase. In 2000, NetScreen now launched the first gigabit firewall. It's about the size of a refrigerator. To do a gigabit of firewall, you could probably go to Best Buy or Fry's and buy a gigabit firewall for like $69 today. Now we're looking at solutions with aggregate performance in the terabit range for firewalls, for security appliance platforms. So there's a huge requirement, and that's because we all have fast networks now. We asked then about barriers. So what stops you from making new investments? And I talked about platform consolidation already. The fact that they don't get complete protection out of their existing platforms, and the fact that their infrastructure is super complex drives them towards consolidating. And if you watch history, if everyone here is familiar with a company called FireEye, CSG, part of the Invotas solution, works with FireEye. FireEye is a sandbox. Basically, you get a piece of malware, maybe, you put it in a virtual execution environment, you open it up, and you see what happens before it goes through the network and the user has a chance to open it up. Then you can positively identify, hey, this is a threat, here's what it did, let's do something about it. Incidentally, FireEye was the solution that identified the piece of malware in the target breach that was then not allowed to fix it. That's a feature right now. They IPO'd, everyone wants their stock, that's a huge deal. In 5 years, that is gonna be one small feature on a long list of features on a consolidated platform, whether that's a big appliance or whether that's a software solution that goes into a cloud environment. And that's the nature of security technology. Somebody has a great idea to prevent the latest attack. We build a market, a standalone market based on it. We grow that to around $1 billion. And then everyone figures out how to cram that into their existing platform with good performance. None of this matters to CSG, ultimately, because as long as you can control the function on some platform or another, you can provide automation for it. But it just adds to this infrastructure complexity. So as a reaction to infrastructure complexity, as a reaction to the move to the cloud, we've developed in the industry a bunch of hosted or cloud-based services. So say you want to provide mail security for your users and you don't want to buy a Barracuda spam firewall or a Cisco Ironport mail security gateway. You just want to route all your email traffic through some secure cloud, have it scanned, and deal with all the threats in the cloud, and then pass it back to wherever it needs to go. This is a reaction to needs for business agility, enterprises' desire to move from capital to operational spend, the ability to scale infrastructure like that, and the ability to apply that kind of service to IT when it's in the cloud. But it's also a response to the complexity of doing this in your own environment with some reasonable level of security. So the same things that will drive people to look at automation solutions, drive them into the cloud. I said mobile device is a big issue. From a security manager's standpoint, ideally, this is a problem that they would solve in their network, where the traffic all ends up, or in the cloud somewhere. You talk to someone who manages security for a living and say, you have to solve the security issue for your mobile devices, and you can only do it using footprint on the devices. They're going to kill you, because half the devices they can't even get their hands on. If they could touch every device, there isn't one single platform that they could deploy that would provide the exact same level of security across all their devices. And the device turnover is so fast that they constantly have to touch the devices, no matter how automated the process of deploying the software on the device. So they want to do it in the network. So then protecting mobile traffic becomes a part of all of these other platforms that they're already deploying. And ultimately, it's going to be indistinguishable, right? The email traffic from your phone is the same as the email traffic from your desktop or your laptop. And ultimately, you need to deal with that in the network. So I just threw this in there. These are perceptions of top vendors. There are tons of vendors in this space. If you don't follow security, it would probably surprise you to know that on the network security side, the sort of the core firewall protecting networks business, Cisco is now the biggest vendor in the world and also one of the best, perceived as one of the top vendors by customers, even though as consumers, we probably still think of people like McAfee and Symantec and Trend Micro, the desktop software security vendors as being the biggest security vendors. It's really the folks that solve the problem in the network for service providers, for enterprises, in the data center, in the large enterprise that have become the most powerful security companies in the world. And I think it's gonna stay that way.